Listen closely. That sound, the gentle, rhythmic lapping of water against a rocky shore. Now picture a dense, rolling fog clinging to the surface of a vast, dark lake, and within that mist, a shape, distant, amorphous, impossibly large, just barely breaking the water before vanishing without a trace. For centuries, that fleeting image, that whisper of something unknown lurking in the depths, has captivated the world. This is Loch Ness, and the mystery that dwells within its cold, peat-stained waters is perhaps the greatest and most beloved historical enigma of all time. We are talking, of course, about the legend of the Loch Ness Monster. This isn't just a simple campfire story. It is a puzzle that has endured through generations, drawing in skeptics and believers alike, a true testament to our enduring fascination with the unexplored and the unexplained. Today, we're embarking on a journey to the Scottish Highlands to investigate this mystery for ourselves, to separate fact from fiction, and to explore why, in an age of satellites and science, the question of Nessie's existence still holds such a powerful grip on our imagination. This video is your guide into the heart of the legend. We will travel back in time to uncover the very origins of the myth, long before the first blurry photograph made global headlines. We'll stand on the very shores where legendary sightings were reported, hearing the accounts of those who swore they saw something extraordinary. We will walk through the history of this phenomenon, from ancient local folklore to the explosive 20th century sightings that transformed a local tale into a worldwide sensation. But we won't stop at the stories. We're going to dive deep into the scientific investigations that have probed the loch's mysterious depths, from ambitious sonar sweeps to high-tech underwater cameras, all in a relentless pursuit of the truth. What did these expeditions really find? And what compelling, natural explanations have been offered for the seemingly supernatural encounters recorded over the years? Most importantly, we will explore what the enduring legacy of the Loch Ness Monster tells us about ourselves. Why does this particular mystery resonate so deeply across different cultures and eras? It's a story that touches on something fundamental within us, a sense of wonder, a hope that there are still marvels hidden in the world, waiting just beyond the edge of our understanding. This is more than a search for a creature, it's an exploration of human curiosity itself. So, if you're ready to look into the murky waters of one of history's greatest puzzles, to question what you think you know, and to join an investigation that has spanned decades, then you are in the right place. The story of Nessie is waiting, and it is far stranger and more fascinating than you can possibly imagine. To understand how such a powerful legend took hold, we must travel back in time, long before tourists lined the shores with cameras. The story of a creature in the loch is not a modern invention. Its roots are ancient, intertwined with the very history of Scotland itself. One of the most compelling early accounts comes not from a fisherman or a farmer, but from a saint. In the year 565, the Irish monk Saint Columba was traveling through the region, bringing Christianity to the Pictish people. The biography of his life, written about a century later, records a remarkable event. As Columba approached the river Ness, which flows from the loch, he saw a group of men burying a companion who had been attacked and killed by a water beast while swimming. The story goes that Columba, to demonstrate the power of his faith, ordered one of his own followers to swim across the river. When the monster inevitably surged toward the man, Columba made the sign of the cross and commanded the beast to retreat in the name of God. According to the text, the creature fled in terror, and the people who witnessed it were amazed. This 6th century tale is fascinating because it contains all the core elements of the modern myth. A large, aggressive aquatic animal inhabiting these specific waters, a sudden and terrifying appearance, and an aura of the supernatural. This written account is powerfully supported by physical evidence etched in stone. Scattered throughout the Scottish Highlands are ancient artifacts created by the Picts, the fierce and enigmatic people who lived in this region. They left behind intricately carved standing stones, many of which feature a unique and recurring symbol: a strange beast with a long beak or snout, flippers, and a large rounded body. This symbol, now known as the Pictish beast, bears a striking and uncanny resemblance to descriptions of a plesiosaur, the prehistoric marine reptile most often associated with Nessie. While archaeologists debate the exact meaning of these carvings, they could represent a real animal, a mythological creature, or a tribal symbol. Their presence in the very landscape surrounding Loch Ness is deeply suggestive. It indicates that the idea of a mysterious, formidable creature living in the water was a part of the local cultural imagination for centuries, long before the term Loch Ness Monster was ever spoken. But why here? What is it about this particular body of water that seems to nurture such an enduring mystery? The answer lies in the loch itself, a place of almost overwhelming scale and atmosphere. Loch Ness is a geographical marvel. It is not a small, placid lake. It is a vast, deep trench carved by glaciers during the last ice age. It holds more fresh water than all the lakes in England and Wales combined. Its depth is staggering, plunging to over 700 feet in places, with a bottom that is largely unexplored and shrouded in deep sediment. The water is perpetually cold, a near-freezing temperature that it preserves anything that falls into it. And then there is the color. The water is famously dark, stained a deep, opaque brown by the peat from the surrounding hills. This peat suspension means visibility is often reduced to just a few inches. This unique combination of immense depth, frigid temperatures, and near-zero visibility creates the perfect breeding ground for mystery. It is a landscape that actively resists investigation, a place where the mind can easily conjure shapes in the murk, and where something truly ancient could, in theory, hide undisturbed in the profound and lightless silence far below. For centuries, the legend remained mostly local, a whisper carried on the Highland wind. But in 1933, a single year would transform that quiet whisper into an international roar, turning the loch into a global stage. The catalyst for this change was surprisingly mundane: a new road. The construction of a modern highway along the loch's western shore, followed by improvements along the eastern side, opened up the previously remote and rugged landscape to a new kind of witness, the motorist. Suddenly, hundreds of people were driving along the loch with clear, unobstructed views of the water, their attention free from the demands of navigating treacherous old paths. The stage was set for a spectacle, and in April of that year it arrived. The first major act in this modern drama did not even occur in the water. It happened on land, an element that made the account all the more startling and difficult to dismiss. In late July, a London businessman named George Spicer and his wife were driving along the new road when they witnessed something that would become the cornerstone of the entire phenomenon. As they recounted to the Inverness Courier, a huge, unidentified animal lumbered across the road directly in front of their car. They described it as having an enormous, heavy body, perhaps 6 to 8 feet long, with a long, undulating neck that carried a dead sheep or some other animal in its mouth. They noted it had no visible legs, moving across the gravel in a series of awkward jerks before disappearing into the loch. The sheer strangeness of the account, a creature so large and unfamiliar crossing a public roadway, captured the public's imagination in a way that simple water sightings never had. It was tangible, it was on dry land, and it was witnessed by a respectable, seemingly credible source. The Spicer story was a gift to the local press. The editor of the Inverness Courier, a man named Evan Barron, saw the potential immediately. When he published the account on August 4, 1933, he made a crucial editorial decision. He needed a compelling headline, a word that would encapsulate the bizarre event. He chose the term monster. That single word, used in a reputable newspaper, changed everything. It gave the phenomenon a name and an identity. The Loch Ness Monster was born in print, and the story was quickly picked up by national and then international news agencies. The world, still grappling with the Great Depression, was hungry for a distraction, a story of wonder and mystery, and the idea of a prehistoric survivor in a Scottish loch was irresistible. This media explosion created a feedback loop of immense power. The widespread publicity encouraged others to come forward with their own stories, some recent, some from years past, that they had previously been too shy or too fearful to share. Each new testimony, whether from a fisherman, a housewife, or another motorist, added another layer to the legend, making it seem more plausible and more real. The loch was no longer just a body of water. It had become a character in a global mystery, and everyone wanted a glimpse. This was the spark that ignited a century of fascination, setting in motion the expeditions, the photographs, and the debates that would define the search for Nessie from that moment forward. And then, just as public interest was reaching a fever pitch, came the evidence that would seem to settle the debate for a generation. In April 1934, the London Daily Mail published a photograph that would become the single most defining image of the Loch Ness Monster. It was taken by a respected London gynecologist, Robert Kenneth Wilson, who wished to remain anonymous, and thus it forever became known as the surgeon's photograph. The image was hauntingly clear. Against the dark, rippling background of the loch, a long, slender neck and a small, dinosaur-like head break the surface of the water. It was exactly what the public imagination had been waiting for. This was not a vague shape or a distant splash. It was a specific, detailed creature, and its silhouette bore an unmistakable resemblance to a plesiosaur, a marine reptile from the age of dinosaurs. The photograph had an immediate and explosive impact. Here was proof, not from an excitable tourist or a local farmer, but from a man of science, a medical doctor whose professional standing lent his evidence an air of unassailable credibility. The press and the public embraced it wholeheartedly. For the first time, you could point to a picture and say, "There it is." The power of the surgeon's photograph lay in its perfect alignment with the emerging legend. It visually confirmed the descriptions that had been circulating for years, transforming abstract reports into a tangible reality. Newspapers around the world splashed the image across their front pages, and it quickly became ingrained in popular culture. It was reproduced in books, featured in documentaries, and stamped onto postcards. For decades, this single photograph was the cornerstone of the case for Nessie's existence. It was presented as the best evidence, the one piece of the puzzle that was difficult to dismiss. The photograph did more than just document a possible creature. It actively shaped the legend itself, cementing the image of a prehistoric survivor in the public mind. It made the mystery accessible to everyone, a seemingly incontrovertible piece of evidence that turned skepticism into belief and turned a local curiosity into a global icon. The legend now had a face, and it was looking right back at us from the murky waters of Loch Ness. Yet for 60 years, the photograph stood as an icon of the unexplained, its authority seemingly unshakable. That is, until 1994, when the entire edifice came crashing down in a stunning confession. The man who came forward was Christian Sperling, then an elderly man, who revealed on his deathbed that the most famous picture of the Loch Ness Monster was nothing more than an elaborate prank. The story he told was one of revenge and humiliation, orchestrated by a man named Marmaduke Wetherell. Wetherell, a big game hunter and occasional film director, had been hired by the Daily Mail just a year earlier in 1933 to find the monster. His mission ended in embarrassment when he presented what he claimed were the creature's footprints, only for museum experts to identify them as having been made by a dried hippopotamus foot, likely repurposed from an umbrella stand. The Daily Mail publicly ridiculed Wetherell, and he was left feeling bitter and vengeful. Sperling, who was Wetherell's stepson, explained that the hoax was Wetherell's way of getting back at the newspaper that had humiliated him. The plot was simple yet brilliant. Sperling, a skilled model maker, constructed the monster from a 14-inch-long toy submarine. To this, he attached a neck and head crafted from plastic wood. Wetherell then enlisted Robert Kenneth Wilson, the surgeon, not as the photographer, but as the respectable frontman to lend the image credibility. The actual picture was likely taken by Wetherell himself or another conspirator. They chose a spot in the loch, submerged the model just enough to create the iconic silhouette, and snapped the photo that would fool the world for generations. Wilson's involvement has never been fully clarified, but his professional status was the key ingredient that made the hoax so effective. The men never expected the photograph to achieve such global fame. They had intended it as a private joke against the Daily Mail, a quiet act of payback that spiraled completely out of control. The exposure of the surgeon's photograph as a hoax delivered a devastating blow to the credibility of the entire Loch Ness phenomenon. It created a crisis of confidence that extended far beyond that single image. If this, the best and most famous piece of evidence, was a deliberate fraud, then what did that say about every other photograph, every sonar blip, and every eyewitness account? The revelation forced a fundamental shift in the debate. It gave skeptics their most powerful argument that the entire legend was built on a foundation of wishful thinking, misidentification, and, in some cases, outright deception. Believers were suddenly thrust onto the defensive, forced to re-examine every claim with heightened suspicion. The hoax cast a long shadow, making it exponentially more difficult for any new evidence to be taken seriously by the scientific community or the wider public. It taught a painful lesson about the power of confirmation bias, the human tendency to interpret ambiguous evidence in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. For decades, people had wanted to see a monster in that photograph, and so they did. The exposure was a sobering reminder that our eyes can be tricked, not just by hoaxers, but by our own deepest desires for mystery and wonder. Yet, even as the shadow of the surgeon's photograph hoax lengthened, the allure of the mystery refused to die. Instead of extinguishing interest, the scandal seemed to galvanize a new kind of seeker, one armed not with a camera for a quick snapshot, but with a methodical, almost obsessive determination to apply rigorous science to the legend. This shift in approach culminated in the 1960s with the formation of the most ambitious organized effort in the history of the search, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, or LNPIB. This was not a club for enthusiasts. It was a formally constituted body of scientists, engineers, and dedicated volunteers who aimed to transform the hunt for Nessie from a matter of folklore into a subject of serious scientific scrutiny. Their founding principle was simple yet revolutionary. If something was in the loch, it could be found not by chance but through continuous, systematic observation. The Bureau's methods were a world away from the sporadic sightings of passing tourists. They established a permanent, round-the-clock watch on the loch, setting up multiple observation stations equipped with cameras mounted with long telephoto lenses. But their most ingenious tool was the use of time-lapse photography. They would aim cameras at the water and set them to take a single frame at regular intervals over days and nights, creating a visual record of the entire surface of the loch. This approach was designed to eliminate human error and fatigue. The camera would never blink, never look away, and would capture anything that broke the surface, regardless of whether a volunteer was watching at that exact moment. It was a monumental undertaking, requiring immense dedication from the largely unpaid members who took shifts in all weather, patiently scanning the vast, often featureless expanse of water. They were not seeking a moment of glory. They were engaged in a patient, meticulous census of the loch's surface activity, amassing a volume of data that had never before been attempted. For years, this volunteer army kept their vigil, compiling thousands of hours of film and countless photographs. The result was a catalogue of the ordinary waves, boat wakes, floating logs, and the occasional curious seal that had wandered in from the sea, but also a small collection of truly anomalous images. These were not the clear portraits the public craved. They were often distant, blurry shapes, strange humps or disturbances on the water that defied immediate explanation. While none of these photographs could be declared definitive proof of a monster, they were also difficult to dismiss outright. They represented the phenomena the Bureau was named for, unexplained events that warranted further investigation. This systematic collection of data, with its mix of the mundane and the mysterious, gave the search a new layer of credibility. It was no longer about a single, questionable picture. It was about a pattern of unexplained occurrences recorded under controlled conditions. The true legacy of the LNPIB, however, was not in any single photograph it produced, but in the precedent it set. It marked a fundamental shift from casual observation to structured scientific inquiry. The Bureau brought a level of organization and technological application to the mystery that inspired all future investigations. It demonstrated that the only way to conquer the sheer scale and mystery of Loch Ness was through sustained, coordinated effort. While the Bureau eventually disbanded in the early 1970s without having secured conclusive evidence, it left behind a crucial blueprint. It proved that the question of Nessie was worthy of serious attention, and that the tools of science were the only reliable way to navigate the murky waters between legend and potential reality. Their work set the stage for the next, even more technologically advanced phase of the hunt, which would take the search deep beneath the surface, into the lightless world where the ultimate secrets of the loch were waiting. With the dedication of the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau providing a new framework of systematic observation, the 1960s also produced what many still consider the single most compelling piece of visual evidence ever captured. This was not a photograph from a roadside or a grainy image from a time-lapse camera. It was a moving picture, a film that seemed to show the creature in motion. The man behind the camera was Tim Dinsdale, an aeronautical engineer by profession, whose methodical and analytical mind brought a unique credibility to his encounter. In April 1960, Dinsdale, already fascinated by the mystery, was on his sixth expedition to the loch, armed with a 16mm movie camera. He was not a tourist hoping for a lucky break. He was a researcher conducting a serious survey. On his final morning, just as he was preparing to leave, he noticed a curious, reddish-brown hump stationary in the water about a mile away across the loch. He initially thought it was a boat, but through his binoculars he saw no cabin or superstructure. Then, as he watched, the object began to move. What happened next was captured on 4 minutes of film that would become legendary. The hump, which Dinsdale estimated to be around 6 feet long, started to travel across the loch, leaving a powerful, churning wake behind it. It moved with a clear, purposeful motion, first heading away from the far shore before turning and moving parallel to it. Then, in the final moments of the film, the hump slowly submerged, disappearing beneath the dark water. For Dinsdale and for countless viewers afterward, this was the critical moment. A stationary boat might be a boat, but a boat does not simply sink out of sight. The object's movement and final submersion suggested a living creature, something that was propelling itself and then diving. Dinsdale's film did not show a long neck or a dinosaur-like head. It was far more subtle, yet somehow more convincing. It was a sustained observation of an unidentified object exhibiting clear, animate behavior. The film's impact was magnified enormously when it was subjected to an analysis that no other piece of Nessie evidence had ever received. The BBC, which had purchased the film for broadcast, submitted it to the Royal Air Force's Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre, or JARIC. This was a highly secretive government unit staffed by expert photographic analysts whose daily work involved meticulously examining aerial spy photographs to identify enemy aircraft, missiles, and installations. Their entire profession was built on distinguishing reality from deception, on interpreting minute details in grainy footage. This was not a panel of cryptozoology enthusiasts. These were cold, professional skeptics trained by the military. After a painstaking frame-by-frame analysis, Jarek released a report that sent shockwaves through the debate. They concluded that the object in Dinsdale's film was probably animate. They estimated its speed at about 10 miles per hour and its length at a significant 12 feet. They ruled out the possibility of it being a surface vessel or a submarine. While they stopped short of declaring it a monster, their authoritative conclusion that it was a living creature of substantial size lent the film an almost unimpeachable authority. The enduring power of the Dinsdale film lies in this unique combination of factors. It was filmed by a trained engineer, not a casual observer. It captured a sustained sequence of behavior, not a single, ambiguous snapshot. And most importantly, it was validated by an independent, highly respected scientific body with no vested interest in the monster debate. For believers, the Jarek analysis is the cornerstone of the entire case. It represents the closest the legend has ever come to receiving an official scientific endorsement. Skeptics, of course, have offered alternative explanations over the years, suggesting the object could have been a boat, though the submersion remains a stubborn counterpoint. Yet, even with advanced digital enhancement techniques applied decades later, the film retains its mystery. While some modern analyzers have suggested the object might be smaller and closer to the camera than Dinsdale thought, they have never definitively identified it. The Dinsdale film, therefore, occupies a unique and frustrating space in the annals of Loch Ness. It is evidence that is compelling enough to be taken seriously, yet just ambiguous enough to avoid being conclusive proof. It is a ghost on celluloid, a hint of something real moving in the water, forever resisting a final, simple explanation. While the Dinsdale film provided a tantalizing glimpse of something moving on the surface, it left the most profound questions unanswered. What was happening in the deep, dark world beneath the waves, a realm completely invisible to the human eye and to surface cameras? To solve that mystery, investigators knew they needed a different kind of tool, one that could pierce the loch's infamous murk and map the unseen. That tool was sonar, and its application in the hunt for Nessie would lead to what many considered the most scientifically compelling chapter in the entire saga. The turning point came in the early 1970s, spearheaded by a group that brought a new level of technological sophistication and academic credibility to the search, the Academy of Applied Science, under the determined leadership of Dr. Robert Rines. Dr. Rines was not a hobbyist. He was a patents lawyer, a respected inventor, and a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His approach was methodical and engineering-based. If a large animal was living in Loch Ness, he reasoned, it would have to be tracked not by chance sightings, but by systematically scanning the underwater environment it called home. The Academy's expedition in 1970 marked a fundamental shift in strategy. They anchored a boat named the Narwhal in Urquhart Bay, one of the deepest parts of the loch, and began a continuous 24-hour sonar watch. Sonar, or sound navigation and ranging, works by sending pulses of sound energy into the water. These sound waves travel until they hit an object, then bounce back as an echo. By measuring the time it takes for the echo to return, the equipment can calculate the object's distance and, with advanced units, even begin to interpret its size and shape. It was the perfect technology for Loch Ness, completely unaffected by the peat-stained water that rendered cameras useless. For days, the team monitored the readouts, which mostly displayed the familiar contours of the underwater landscape, the steep, sloping sides of the glacial trench that formed the loch. But then, on a late August night, the steady rhythm of the sonar returns was dramatically interrupted. The equipment registered a massive, solid contact. It wasn't resting on the bottom, it was suspended in the water column, and it was moving. The sonar operator tracked the object as it descended from about 100 feet to over 200 feet, maneuvering near the submerged cliffs of the bay. The most electrifying moment came when the sonar return seemed to show a distinct, appendage-like shape moving relative to the main body. Dr. Rhines and his team interpreted this signature as a large, powerful flipper in motion. This was a revelation. A flipper suggested an animate creature, and a large one at that, propelling itself through the profound depths. Unlike a photograph that could be dismissed as a log or a wave, this was data. It was an electronic record of a substantial, unidentified, and apparently living object operating in a part of the loch where no known large fish or mammal should have been. For the first time, technology had seemingly reached into the abyss and touched the mystery itself. The significance of this 1970 sonar contact cannot be overstated. It moved the entire debate into a new dimension, literally. It provided a type of evidence that was immune to the criticisms leveled at photographs. You could not hoax a sonar return on the equipment of a serious scientific expedition without direct physical tampering, which no one credibly alleged. The data suggested scale, movement, and behavior, painting a picture of a large-bodied aquatic animal. This big find galvanized Dr. Rhines and his team, convincing them they were on the right track. It justified the investment in more advanced technology and set the stage for even more ambitious expeditions in the years to come. Expeditions that would aim not just to detect the creature, but to finally photograph it in the deep, dark water it called home. The sonar contact was a beacon, a signal from the depths that said, "There is something down here worth chasing." Bolstered by the tantalizing sonar contacts, Dr. Robert Rhines and his team from the Academy of Applied Science returned to Loch Ness with renewed determination and a more ambitious goal. They were no longer content with just electronic pings from the deep. They wanted a picture. To achieve this, they devised a sophisticated underwater photography system designed to overcome the loch's greatest challenge: the absolute darkness and near-zero visibility below the surface. Their setup was ingenious. They used high-powered strobe lights synchronized with cameras that were lowered into the water and aimed not randomly but at a specific focal plane. The entire apparatus was triggered by the very same sonar unit that had registered the mysterious contacts. If a large, solid object swam through the sonar beam, it would automatically activate the cameras and strobes, capturing an image of whatever had passed by, regardless of the murky water. It was a trap, a technological snare set for a ghost. In 1972, this system produced its first intriguing results. The photographs that emerged from the development process were dark, grainy, and difficult to interpret, but one image in particular stood out. It appeared to show a rough, textured surface, almost like an elephant's skin or reptilian hide. While compelling to the team, it was considered too ambiguous to present as conclusive evidence. They needed something clearer, and in 1975 they believed they had found it. During another expedition, their automated system was triggered, and the resulting photographs created a sensation that rivaled the impact of the surgeon's photograph 40 years earlier. The most famous of these images, often nicknamed the gargoyle head photograph, is a hauntingly strange picture. In the center of the frame, illuminated by the stark burst of the strobe light against the inky blackness, is a bizarre, rough-textured object. To its side, appearing to be attached, is a distinct diamond-shaped appendage that strongly resembles a large, powerful flipper. The immediate interpretation by Rhines and his colleagues was breathtaking. They believed they were looking at the close-up body of an enormous, unknown animal. The rough texture was its skin, and the diamond-shaped object was a flipper, perhaps one of 4 used for propulsion. When paired with the earlier sonar data that had suggested a flipper in motion, the photograph seemed to provide a stunning visual confirmation. The creature's shape, particularly the flipper, was instantly linked to the plesiosaur hypothesis. Plesiosaurs, those long-necked marine reptiles from the dinosaur era, were known from fossil evidence to have had exactly this kind of large, diamond-shaped paddle flipper. The image seemed to be a perfect match, a glimpse of a living fossil that had somehow survived extinction in the cold, isolated depths of Loch Ness. To counter the inevitable skepticism, the Academy of Applied Science sought the most authoritative analysis possible. They sent the photographic negatives to NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, in Pasadena, California. At the time, JPL was at the forefront of imaging technology, specializing in enhancing the grainy, low-contrast photographs being sent back from deep space probes like Voyager. If anyone could extract hidden detail from a difficult image, it was them. The scientists at JPL applied their advanced computer enhancement techniques to the Loch Ness photographs, and their conclusions sent a shockwave through the scientific community. They confirmed that the image showed a genuine, physical object, not a double exposure or a simple flaw in the film. More importantly, their enhancements suggested further detail within the gargoyle head, including what appeared to be a neck-like structure and even a small head. For believers, this was the Holy Grail. The endorsement of NASA Premier Imaging Lab gave the photographs a level of scientific credibility that no previous evidence had ever possessed. It seemed that space-age technology had finally uncovered the secret of the deep. However, this veneer of scientific certainty was not destined to last. As the initial excitement subsided, rigorous criticism began to emerge from the fields of biology and paleontology. One of the most significant challenges came from the late Dr. Roy Mackal, a biochemist and a vice president of the International Society of Cryptozoology, who was himself a believer in the possibility of a large unknown animal in the loch. Even Mackal found a major problem with the plesiosaur interpretation. He pointed out that the diamond-shaped flipper in the photograph, if it was a flipper, was oriented incorrectly. In a plesiosaur, the flippers are positioned for vertical movement, like the wings of a penguin or a sea turtle, providing lift and propulsion for swimming up and down in the water column. The flipper in the photograph, however, appeared to be oriented for horizontal movement, more like the paddle of a seal used for side-to-side motion. This was a fundamental anatomical discrepancy that challenged the most popular and exciting explanation. The most persistent skeptical argument, however, was far simpler and to many more convincing. Critics proposed that the gargoyle head was not a living creature at all, but a sunken log from one of the many ancient forests surrounding the loch. When wood decomposes underwater, it can take on a cracked, rough texture that closely resembles reptilian skin. Furthermore, as the wood softens and breaks down, parts of it can split and peel away, creating shapes that look unnaturally like flippers or appendages. The sonar, they argued, could have been triggered by a log slowly tumbling along the bottom in the currents, and the camera simply captured a macabre, natural sculpture created by decay. The debate over these photographs ultimately came to symbolize the entire Loch Ness mystery. For believers, the combination of sonar data, the striking visual, and the NASA analysis formed a powerful, interlocking case for something extraordinary. For skeptics, it was a classic example of pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns like faces and bodies in random shapes. The same object could be either a miraculous survivor from the age of dinosaurs or a piece of waterlogged timber, depending entirely on the perspective of the viewer. The photographs, for all their technological sophistication, had not provided a final answer. They had simply deepened the mystery, proving that even with the best tools, Loch Ness guards its secrets well. The story of the Loch Ness Monster is not just a collection of blurry photographs and sonar blips. It is fundamentally a human story, driven by the passion and determination of individuals whose lives became inextricably linked to the mystery. And perhaps no single person embodies this lifelong dedication more than Tim Dinsdale, the aeronautical engineer whose name is now synonymous with a sincere, methodical search for the truth. His journey into the heart of the legend began not with a childhood fascination, but with a professional's curiosity. After reading a magazine article on the subject, Dinsdale, with his engineer's mind trained to analyze data and solve problems, found himself intrigued by the sheer volume of eyewitness accounts. He saw a puzzle that demanded a systematic approach, and in 1960 he decided to see the loch for himself, setting out on what would be the first of 56 expeditions. He was a man of science seeking to apply logic to a subject often dismissed as pure fantasy. It was on that first trip on April 23rd that his life was irrevocably changed. The film he captured of the mysterious hump moving across the loch was not just a piece of evidence, it was a personal revelation. For Dinsdale, seeing that object move with purpose and then slowly submerge was a transformative experience. It shifted his perspective from that of a curious investigator to a committed believer. He had not merely recorded an anomaly, he had witnessed something that he felt in his bones was a living, breathing creature. This conviction propelled him into a new life's mission. He would spend the next quarter century until his death in 1987, returning to Loch Ness summer after summer, often at great personal expense, meticulously documenting every aspect of the loch and its phenomena. He was not a fame seeker, he was a man on a quest driven by a profound need to validate what he had seen with his own eyes. Dinsdale's background as an engineer was his greatest asset, setting him apart from many other hunters. He brought a rigorous, analytical approach to the search. He carefully logged weather conditions, water temperatures, and boat traffic. He created detailed maps of sightings, looking for patterns that might indicate the creature's feeding grounds or travel routes. He published multiple books, including the seminal Loch Ness Monster, which presented his evidence and theories with the clarity and structure of a technical report. In these writings, he never claimed to have all the answers, but he built a compelling case, piece by logical piece. He argued for the possibility of a large, unknown species, perhaps a zeuglodon, a primitive type of whale, surviving in the loch's immense and isolated ecosystem. His work was characterized by a quiet authority and a complete lack of sensationalism, earning him a respect even among skeptics who admired his sincerity. What truly defines Tim Dinsdale's legacy, however, is the profound human element he brought to the mystery. He was not chasing a monster, he was searching for an animal. He spoke of the creature with a sense of respect and even awe, viewing it as a marvel of nature that deserved to be understood and protected. His dedication came at a cost, requiring significant time away from his family and a substantial financial investment, all driven by a belief that he was contributing to a great zoological discovery. He represents the archetype of the gentle, determined monster hunter, a figure fueled not by a desire for glory, but by an insatiable curiosity and a deep-seated conviction that the world still holds magnificent secrets. In many ways, Tim Dinsdale's life story is as much a part of the Loch Ness legend as the creature itself, a testament to the power of a single moment to redefine a lifetime, and a reminder that the most enduring mysteries are often pursued by those with the courage to believe. As the 20th century drew to a close, the search for a prehistoric plesios began to face a formidable challenge from a far more plausible, if decidedly less dramatic, candidate. The romantic image of a dinosaur surviving in the Scottish Highlands is a powerful one, but science often reveals that reality is stranger and more subtle than fiction. This brings us to what is currently the most scientifically supported explanation for the Loch Ness Monster, the theory that witnesses have been seeing exceptionally large European eels. This hypothesis doesn't rely on miraculous survivals from the age of dinosaurs, but on a known resident of the loch, a creature whose own life cycle is shrouded in almost as much mystery as the legend itself. The European eel is a fascinating animal, a snake-like fish with a complex multi-stage life that begins thousands of miles away in the Sargasso Sea. From there, the tiny, transparent larval eels, known as leptosphali, drift on ocean currents for up to 3 years before reaching the coasts of Europe. They then transform into glass eels, enter freshwater rivers and lochs, and mature into the yellow and then silver eels we might recognize. Loch Ness, connected to the sea via the River Ness, has a robust and well-documented population of these eels. They are a natural part of the ecosystem, and for most of their lives they are relatively small. The critical question, however, is what might happen if one of these eels failed to follow the script, if it never received the biological trigger to return to the sea to spawn. This phenomenon is known as neoteny, the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood, and in the case of eels, it can lead to continued growth far beyond their normal size. Most eels that migrate to the Sargasso Sea are around 2 to 3 feet long, but an eel that remains in the abundant, cold, and deep waters of Loch Ness could, in theory, keep growing for decades. Conger eels, a marine relative, routinely reach lengths of 6 to 10 feet. There is no biological law stating that a European eel could not achieve a similar size under the right conditions. Now picture a creature of that scale, a 6, 8, or even 10-foot-long, muscular, serpentine animal propelling itself through the water with powerful undulations. Its back, breaking the surface on a calm day, could easily create the classic hump sighting. Its long, dark body moving just below the surface could account for the multiple reports of a long neck or a series of humps. The way an eel swims a sinuous, rolling motion perfectly matches many historical descriptions of the monster's movement. Even the head, when seen at a distance, could be misinterpreted, especially if the viewer's mind is already primed by the legend to see something more exotic. This theory has the significant advantage of being biologically plausible, requiring no suspension of the laws of evolution or ecology. Only the existence of a few abnormally large individuals of a known species. The most compelling modern evidence for the eel theory arrived in 2019 with the publication of a groundbreaking genetic survey of Loch Ness. Professor Neil Gemmell, a geneticist from the University of Otago in New Zealand, led an international team that undertook a massive environmental DNA or eDNA study. The principle behind eDNA is elegant. Every organism constantly sheds tiny fragments of DNA into its environment, from skin cells, scales, waste, and mucus. By collecting hundreds of water samples from all over Loch Ness and at different depths, the team could filter out this genetic material, sequence it, and compare it to a global database of known species. It was a comprehensive biological census, a way to catalog every living thing in the loch without ever having to see it. The results were definitive and, for plesios or believers, disappointing. The study found no evidence of any reptilian DNA that would suggest a Jurassic survivor. There was no DNA from sharks, giant catfish, or any other large exotic animal often proposed as an explanation. What the study did find in overwhelming abundance was DNA from eels. The loch was teeming with eel DNA at every level, confirming that they are a dominant species in the ecosystem. Professor Gemmell was careful to state that this did not prove the existence of monster eels, but it completely ruled out many other theories while leaving the eel hypothesis not only intact but strengthened. The study could not determine the size of the eels that left the DNA. The genetic signature is the same whether the eel is 1 foot long or 10. But it confirmed that if you are looking for a large, animate object in Loch Ness, the most likely candidate by a vast genetic margin is a fish, and the only fish in the loch that fits the morphological description of a long, serpentine creature is the European eel. The eDNA survey represented a new, powerful form of evidence, one that moved beyond blurry photographs and into the realm of molecular biology. It suggested that the truth of Loch Ness may not be a single, unique monster, but a population of known animals that, through a quirk of nature, grow to monstrous proportions, appearing just rarely enough to fuel a legend that has captivated the world for nearly a century. It is an explanation that trades the grandeur of a dinosaur for the intrigue of a biological anomaly, proving that even when stripped of its mythic elements, the loch still holds fascinating secrets. While the giant eel theory offers a compelling biological answer, the waters of Loch Ness are capable of producing illusions that are every bit as strange as any living creature. The loch is not just a body of water, it is a dynamic and often volatile environment where weather, geology, and physics can combine to create stunning natural phenomena that are easily mistaken for something more. One of the most scientifically fascinating explanations involves a rare but powerful wave action known as a cyc. Picture the loch as a giant 23-mile-long bathtub. When strong, sustained winds blow along its length, they can push a massive volume of water to one end. Then, when the wind suddenly drops or changes direction, that entire body of water sloshes back, creating a standing wave that oscillates from one end of the loch to the other. This isn't a normal wave that breaks on the shore. A cyc is a single, rolling hump of water that can travel for miles without dissipating. To a witness on the shore, this moving hump, often accompanied by an unusually large and powerful wake, would look exactly like the back of a gigantic animal swimming just below the surface. The motion is smooth, purposeful, and on a scale that is difficult to comprehend, making it a perfect recipe for a monster sighting, especially when viewed from a distance through the loch's ever-present haze. Beyond these large-scale wave actions, the loch is also a master of more intimate deceptions. The surrounding hills are thick with ancient forests of Scots pine, and it is common for large trees or even entire logs to fall into the water. A waterlogged pine log can behave in very strange ways. As it becomes saturated, it can sink just below the surface, becoming neutrally buoyant. Then, as gases from decomposition build up inside the wood, it can suddenly lurch back to the surface with surprising force, creating a splash and then rolling in the water, mimicking the appearance of a creature diving or surfacing. The bark of a decomposing Scots pine can take on a rough, scaly texture that, from even a moderate distance, can be easily misinterpreted as reptilian skin. When you combine this with the fact that a long, dark log moving with the current could easily be seen as a neck or a series of humps, it becomes clear how a simple piece of timber could be the source of countless reports. The very atmosphere above the loch also plays a crucial role in shaping what people see. The combination of cold water and shifting air temperatures can create complex thermal layers, leading to unusual light refraction effects known as superior mirages. This is the same principle that creates the illusion of water on a hot road, but over Loch Ness, the effect can be far more dramatic. A distant boat, a floating bird, or even a wave can be distorted, magnified, and elevated above the horizon, appearing much larger and closer than it actually is. A simple cormorant could be transformed into a creature with a long neck, or a small fishing dinghy could take on the appearance of a monstrous hump. These mirages are not constant, they shimmer and shift, making the object appear to move in an unnatural, undulating way. For a witness who only has a few seconds to process the image, the brain, already primed by the legend, desperately tries to make sense of the visual chaos, often settling on the most exciting and culturally available explanation. Even the local wildlife, in their most ordinary moments, can become central characters in the mystery. It is not uncommon for red deer to swim across the narrower parts of the loch. To a viewer on the opposite shore, a swimming deer presents a very specific and misleading silhouette. All that might be visible are the animal's head and antlers, held high above the water, followed by the arch of its back. This creates the perfect profile of the classic Loch Ness Monster, a small head on a long neck followed by a humped body. As the deer swims, its powerful leg strokes would create a significant wake, enhancing the illusion of a large body moving just beneath the surface. Once the deer reaches the other side and disappears into the trees, the witness is left with the undeniable memory of having seen a strange, serpentine creature. Each of these natural explanations, the cyc, the log, the mirage, the swimming deer, may seem mundane on its own, but at Loch Ness they are not isolated events. They are recurring features of the landscape, a catalogue of perfectly normal occurrences that, under the right conditions of light, weather, and expectation, become the building blocks of an extraordinary legend. But beyond the physical deceptions of waves and logs lies an even more powerful force shaping the mystery, one that operates not on the loch itself, but within the mind of the observer. This brings us to the fascinating psychological principles that are arguably the most consistent and active ingredients in the entire Loch Ness phenomenon. The most relevant of these is a cognitive bias known as pareidolia. This is the innate and automatic human tendency to perceive a familiar pattern or meaning in a random or ambiguous stimulus. It's the reason we see faces in the patterns of wood grain or animals in the shapes of clouds. Our brains are hardwired for pattern recognition. It's a survival mechanism that helps us quickly identify potential threats or resources. But at Loch Ness, this helpful instinct works overtime. The dark, choppy, and perpetually shifting surface of the water is a perfect canvas for pareidolia. A random confluence of waves, a patch of sunlight hitting the water at a certain angle, or a piece of floating debris does not present a clear image. It is inherently ambiguous for a visitor standing on the shore, already steeped in the legend and hoping for a glimpse of the famous monster. The brain desperately tries to resolve this visual chaos. It searches its internal library of known shapes, and what is more prominent in that library at that moment than the iconic image of Nessie's hump or long neck? The brain, in a fraction of a second, makes a connection, transforming a meaningless splash into the back of a prehistoric creature. It's not a conscious decision to deceive. It's an unconscious, involuntary process of filling in the blanks with the most exciting and culturally relevant information available. This effect is dramatically amplified by the powerful force of suggestion. From the moment a tourist arrives in the Highlands, they are surrounded by the legend. It's on the signage, in the names of hotels and restaurants, on the postcards in the gift shops, and in the conversations of every other visitor. The expectation of seeing something is palpable in the air. This creates a psychological state of heightened awareness and anticipation. People are not looking at the loch with neutral, scientific detachment. They are scanning it intently, hoping for a sign. This expectation literally primes the brain, making it hypersensitive to any anomaly, no matter how small. A seal surfacing for air, which would be a delightful sighting on any other coastline, becomes a potential monster at Loch Ness. An otter swimming along the shore, its body creating a series of small humps in the water, can be instantly misinterpreted as a miniature version of the creature. Even a lone cormorant, a bird that swims low in the water with only its head and neck visible, can perfectly mimic the classic head and neck sighting from a distance. These are all known, common animals, but viewed through the lens of the Nessie legend, they are transformed. The history of the mystery is filled with clear examples of these misidentifications. There are well-documented cases where a witness reported a spectacular sighting, only for it to be later confirmed as a group of swimming deer or a line of birds diving for fish. In one famous instance, a long, dark object photographed in the water was conclusively identified as a fallen tree branch. What makes these cases so instructive is that the witnesses were invariably sincere. They truly believed they had seen the monster. Their perception was not a lie. It was a genuine interpretation of an ambiguous event, heavily influenced by the powerful context of their surroundings. This doesn't diminish their experience, but it does help explain the incredible volume of sightings over the decades. The loch provides the ambiguous stimulus, and the human brain, guided by legend and hope, provides the extraordinary interpretation. It's a collaborative illusion between a unique environment and the fundamental wiring of our own minds, proving that sometimes the most mysterious thing about Loch Ness is not what's in the water, but what's happening inside our heads. Fueled by decades of tantalizing clues and frustrating dead ends, the hunt for Nessie reached its spectacular, almost cinematic climax in October 1987. This was Operation Deep Scan, an undertaking so ambitious in its scale and technology that it was billed as the definitive, final effort to solve the mystery once and for all. Conceived and funded by millionaire inventor and monster enthusiast Adrian Shine, the operation was designed to eliminate the element of chance that had plagued all previous searches. Instead of waiting for the monster to appear, Deep Scan would sweep the entire loch, systematically scouring every inch of its dark depths with a military-grade technological net. The plan was deceptively simple in concept but staggering in its execution. A flotilla of 24 boats, each equipped with advanced sonar units, would form a continuous line across the width of Loch Ness. Like a giant comb moving through the water, this armada would travel the entire 23-mile length of the loch, their sonar beams scanning the underwater terrain in perfect, synchronized unison. Nothing of significant size, the organizers claimed, would be able to hide. The media frenzy that surrounded Operation Deep Scan was unprecedented. News crews from around the world descended upon the small Scottish villages, their satellite trucks lining the shores. Helicopters buzzed overhead, capturing dramatic footage of the boats moving in formation against the stark backdrop of the Highlands. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of serious scientific inquiry and pure spectacle. For the first time, it felt as if the full weight of modern technology was being brought to bear on a legend that had thrived on ambiguity. Adrian Shine and his team faced immense pressure. The eyes of the world were upon them, waiting for a conclusive answer. Would they return with proof of a prehistoric survivor, or would they finally lay the myth to rest, draining the loch of its greatest mystery? For 3 intense days, the sonar flotilla plied the cold, dark waters. The results, when they were announced, were as intriguing as they were inconclusive. The operation registered 3 strong, unexplained sonar contacts. The most significant of these was a large, solid object detected in Urquhart Bay, the same area that had yielded promising results for Robert Rhines's team years earlier. The contact was substantial and it was moving. The sonar operators tracked it as it descended from a depth of about 180 feet to nearly 500 feet, a dive that suggested a large animate creature. For believers, this was the moment of vindication. Here was data captured not by a lone researcher but by a massive, coordinated scientific effort that pointed to a living entity of considerable size. It was the evidence they had been waiting for, seemingly too significant to be dismissed as a school of fish or a stray log. Skeptics, however, were quick to offer alternative interpretations. They argued that the sonar beams, powerful as they were, could have been reflecting off of peculiar underwater features, such as dense layers of decaying plant matter known as thermoclines, or even from large, swirling masses of silt and peat stirred up from the bottom. The loch's environment is notoriously complex, and they contended that what the sonar interpreted as a single, large moving object could have been a combination of natural phenomena. The debate that followed Operation Deep Scan perfectly encapsulated the entire history of the mystery. One person's incontrovertible proof was another's easily explained false positive. The true legacy of Operation Deep Scan is therefore a dual one. On one hand, it stands as the most serious and large-scale scientific expedition ever mounted to investigate the legend. It demonstrated a commitment to applying rigorous methodology, and its failure to find a definitive monster was in itself a significant scientific result. It dramatically narrowed the possibilities, making it much harder to argue for a breeding population of large creatures. On the other hand, the operation was undeniably a magnificent publicity stunt. It captured the global imagination in a way that no laboratory report ever could, reinvigorating public interest and ensuring the legend's survival for a new generation. In the end, Operation Deep Scan did not solve the mystery of Loch Ness. Instead, it became a powerful symbol of the mystery itself, a grand, technologically advanced quest that ultimately proved that some secrets are guarded not just by deep water, but by the very nature of perception and belief. Yet, even as scientific expeditions like Deep Scan searched for a biological entity, the creature they sought was undergoing a remarkable transformation, escaping the confines of the loch to become something far more powerful and enduring, a global celebrity. The story of Nessie is not just one of sonar pings and disputed photographs. It is a tale of how a local legend was amplified by the engines of modern media until it became a permanent fixture in our collective imagination, a symbol recognized from Tokyo to Tennessee. This journey from obscure folktale to international icon began in earnest with the media frenzy of the 1930s, but it was the burgeoning film industry that truly gave the monster its shape and personality. Hollywood quickly recognized the potent appeal of a giant, misunderstood creature, and in 1934, the same year the surgeon's photograph captivated the world, the movie The Secret of the Loch was released, bringing the mystery to life for cinema audiences. This set a template that would be repeated for decades, portraying Nessie alternately as a terrifying menace, a gentle giant, or a comedic figure, each iteration further cementing its image in the public mind. The real explosion into popular culture, however, occurred in the post-war boom of the 1950s and 60s, a period when television sets were becoming commonplace in living rooms across America and Europe. Animated cartoons proved to be an incredibly effective vehicle for the legend, introducing Nessie to generations of children. Characters like Scooby-Doo and his gang would inevitably unmask the monster as a villain in a rubber mask, yet the very act of featuring the creature week after week reinforced its cultural legitimacy. It became a staple of children's entertainment, a friendly, non-threatening mystery that was fun to explore. This was a crucial shift. Nessie was no longer just a subject for cryptozoologists and newspaper headlines. It had become a toy, a cartoon character, a brand. Advertisers were quick to capitalize on this widespread recognition, using the monster's likeness to sell everything from breakfast cereal and soft drinks to gasoline and insurance. The image of the creature's long neck and humped back became a visual shorthand for mystery itself, an instantly recognizable symbol that could be deployed to suggest that a product was fun, intriguing, or uniquely Scottish. This commodification of the legend had a profound and tangible impact on its place of origin. The Loch Ness Monster evolved into one of the most potent tourist attractions on the planet, single-handedly creating an entire industry in the Scottish Highlands. The small, quiet villages along the loch shore, like Drumna Drochet, were transformed. Gift shops overflowed with plush Nessie toys, postcards, and keychains. Museums dedicated to the mystery opened their doors, offering visitors a curated journey through the history of the sightings. Boat tours began plying the waters, promising passengers not just a scenic view, but a chance to become part of the story themselves. For the local economy, Nessie was not a question mark but an exclamation point, a source of livelihoods and community pride. The creature became inextricably linked with Scottish identity, joining bagpipes, kilts, and castles as an essential part of the country's international brand. This was a fascinating evolution. A legend that many Scots might have once viewed with skepticism was now embraced as a beloved national emblem, a unique piece of their cultural heritage that drew millions of visitors from around the globe. The monster's endurance in popular culture demonstrates a powerful truth. Nessie long ago stopped needing evidence to survive. The idea had taken on a life of its own, becoming a modern myth that fulfills a deep-seated human need for wonder in an increasingly explained and mapped world. It exists in a space similar to that of Santa Claus or Sherlock Holmes. Its reality is almost beside the point. The story itself is the prize. It provides a shared narrative, a common ground for curiosity and speculation that transcends age, nationality, and education. We see this in the countless documentaries, books, and websites dedicated to the subject. not all of which are seeking to prove or disprove the creature's existence, but rather to explore the enduring fascination it holds. The mystery of Loch Ness has become a cultural touchstone, a reference point that everyone understands. It is a story we tell ourselves about the possibility of hidden worlds and the thrill of the unknown, proving that sometimes the most powerful monsters are not those that lurk in the water, but those that live in our stories. But to fully understand how a local legend became a global obsession, we must look beyond the water and into the newsrooms of London, where a different kind of creature was being crafted, the modern media sensation. The explosion of the Loch Ness story in the 1930s was not a simple case of reporters documenting events. It was an active, often calculated process of creation and amplification, fueled by a unique dynamic in British journalism known as the silly season. This was the period during the summer months when Parliament was in recess, major political stories were scarce, and the public's appetite for news remained just as hungry. Newspaper editors, desperate to fill their pages with something that would capture readers' imaginations, turned their attention to lighter, more fantastical stories. A mysterious monster in the Scottish Highlands was the perfect candidate, a harmless, thrilling distraction from the grim realities of the Great Depression. It was a story that offered wonder instead of worry, and the press seized upon it with remarkable vigor. The relationship between specific newspapers and the Nessie phenomenon was far from passive. Publications like the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror didn't just report on the mystery. They became active participants, effectively bankrolling the search and, in doing so, shaping the narrative to their own desires. The Daily Mail's hiring of the big-game hunter Marmaduke Wetherell in 1933 was a clear signal of this new, interventionist approach. They weren't waiting for news to happen, they were sending someone to make it happen. When Wetherell's mission ended in the humiliation of the fake hippo footprints, the newspaper's very public ridicule of him created a backdrop of professional revenge that would later fuel the surgeon's photograph hoax. This incident reveals the precarious dance between the media and its sources. The press demanded spectacular evidence, but when that evidence proved fraudulent, the same institutions that had created the demand were quick to assign blame, protecting their own credibility while keeping the story alive through controversy. This created a powerful, symbiotic loop. Each new sighting, no matter how dubious, generated headlines, which in turn inspired more visitors to travel to Loch Ness, increasing the odds of further sightings. The media coverage acted as a giant spotlight, permanently trained on the loch, ensuring that every ripple and every floating log was scrutinized by an audience primed for discovery. Newspapers published dramatic artists' impressions based on witness accounts, effectively providing the public with a visual template of what they should be looking for. These illustrations, often depicting plesiosaur-like creatures, did more than just report the news. They actively standardized the image of the monster in the public consciousness. If you went to Loch Ness hoping to see Nessie, you were already carrying a mental picture supplied by the Daily Mirror. This feedback cycle was incredibly effective. The media needed a steady stream of content to feed the beast of public interest, and the public, in turn, relied on the media to validate and narrate their fascination. It was a partnership where both sides benefited, but the truth of what was actually in the water often became secondary to the compelling drama of the hunt. The arrival of television in the mid-20th century supercharged this dynamic, adding a new layer of immediacy and spectacle. While newspapers could describe a sighting, television could seemingly take you there. Broadcasts about Loch Ness were event television, captivating families gathered in their living rooms with grainy film reels and the earnest commentary of on-site reporters. Major operations like the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau's Vigil or the spectacular ambition of Operation Deep Scan were perfectly suited for the visual medium. They provided compelling footage of boats on the water, scientists hunched over sonar screens, and the breathtaking scenery of the highlands, all wrapped in a narrative of a high-tech quest for an ancient secret. Television didn't just report on these expeditions, it turned them into prime-time entertainment, blending documentary with adventure serial. This elevated the mystery from a curious news item to a shared cultural experience, ensuring that the legend will be passed down to new generations not just through print, but through the powerful, immersive magic of the screen. The monster had found its most effective accomplice yet, and the partnership would ensure its immortality, regardless of what science might eventually uncover. The grand, organized expeditions of the 20th century, with their flotillas of boats and teams of scientists, have given way to a new, radically decentralized model of investigation. In the 21st century, the search for Nessie has undergone a profound democratization, moving from the exclusive domain of dedicated explorers to the fingertips of anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection. The catalyst for this shift has been the explosion of digital technology, transforming the hunt from a physical endeavor into a virtual one. The most significant development has been the installation of multiple high-definition webcams at strategic points along the loch shore. These cameras, operated by local businesses and tourism boards, stream a live feed of the water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This means that a schoolteacher in Tokyo, a programmer in California, and a retiree in Glasgow can all simultaneously scan the surface of Loch Ness for signs of the unknown, their collective gaze creating an unblinking global vigil that dwarfs the efforts of even the most ambitious historical expeditions. This constant, crowdsourced observation has fundamentally altered the nature of a sighting. No longer does a witness have to be physically present at the loch, braving the infamous Scottish weather. The experience is now mediated through a screen, accessible from the comfort of one's own home. Enthusiasts can bookmark the webcam feeds, checking in during their coffee break or leaving the stream running in a background tab while they work, hoping to catch a glimpse of something extraordinary. Online forums and social media groups have sprung up where users share screenshots of anomalies, debating the merits of a distant wake or a strange shadow with a level of instant collaboration that Tim Dinsdale or Robert Rines could never have imagined. A potential sighting can be analyzed, dissected, and shared with thousands of people within minutes, creating a vibrant global community of amateur sleuths all dedicated to solving the same ancient puzzle. This represents the ultimate evolution of citizen science, turning the mystery of Loch Ness into a participatory, worldwide pastime. The scope of this digital hunt extends far beyond the live webcams. Armchair investigators have also turned to the vast archives of satellite imagery, particularly through platforms like Google Earth. With a few clicks, anyone can zoom in from space to the precise, serpentine shape of Loch Ness and scour its length for anything out of the ordinary. Over the years, several users have claimed to have found conclusive evidence using this method, pointing to long, dark shapes just beneath the water's surface that they argue are simply too large and too defined to be boats or shadows. One famous example from 2009 appeared to show a large, animate object with what looked like flippers, creating a stir in the online cryptozoology community. The allure of satellite imagery is its God's eye view, the promise of an objective, overhead perspective that seems to eliminate the distortions of a ground-level witness. It feels like the ultimate tool for surveillance, a way to finally catch the creature unawares. However, this new technological frontier comes with its own set of unique challenges and pitfalls. The very tools that empower the global search also introduce new sources of error and deception. Digital artifacts are a constant problem. A glitch in the compression of a webcam feed can create pixelated blocks that momentarily resemble a hump. A bird flying close to the camera lens can appear from a distance to be a massive head and neck breaking the surface. With satellite imagery, the issues are even more complex. The images are often composites of several photographs taken at different times and under different lighting conditions, stitched together by sophisticated algorithms. An anomaly might not be an object in the water at all, but a seam in the digital mosaic, a cloud shadow, or the wake of a boat that has been digitally processed in a way that creates an illusion of a solid body. The clarity that users perceive is often an illusion, and the potential for pareidolia, the tendency to see meaningful shapes in random patterns, is arguably greater than ever when staring at a low-resolution image on a computer screen. This digital landscape has also proven to be a fertile ground for a new generation of hoaxers, whose methods are more sophisticated and their potential reach far wider than Marmaduke Wetherell and his toy submarine ever was. With access to powerful image and video editing software, a skilled individual can create a convincing fake Nessie video and upload it to YouTube, where it can go viral and be seen by millions before experts have a chance to debunk it. The motive is no longer just revenge against a newspaper. It can be a desire for online fame, the thrill of causing a sensation, or simply the challenge of creating a believable digital illusion. The democratization of the search has, in effect, also democratized the ability to deceive. This forces every serious researcher to become a digital forensic analyst, scrutinizing metadata, looking for signs of manipulation, and questioning the source of every new piece of evidence that emerges from the online world. The hunt for Nessie has entered an era where the greatest obstacle may not be the depth of the water or the peat-stained murk, but the very technology we use to see through it. And so we arrive at a pivotal moment, a point in the 21st century where the tools of cutting-edge science promise to deliver an answer that decades of sonar scans and grainy photographs could not. This was not another expedition with boats and cameras. This was a quiet, methodical, and profoundly comprehensive biological audit of Loch Ness itself. The year was 2018, and the effort was led by a man who approached the legend not with the passion of a believer or the skepticism of a debunker, but with the detached curiosity of a geneticist. Professor Neil Gemmell from the University of Otago in New Zealand assembled an international team with a singular, ambitious goal: to sequence the loch. Their tool was environmental DNA, or eDNA, a revolutionary technique that operates on a beautifully simple principle. Every living creature, from the smallest bacterium to the largest mammal, is constantly shedding fragments of itself into its environment. Skin, cells, scales, feces, mucus, and even droplets of blood, all of it contains DNA, and all of it lingers in the water for a period of time before breaking down. By taking hundreds of water samples from all over Loch Ness and at various depths, the team could effectively vacuum up this genetic confetti. Back in the laboratory, they would use powerful sequencing technology to read all these tiny fragments of code and then compare them against global databases containing the DNA blueprints of every known species on Earth. It was a way to take a census of the loch's inhabitants without ever having to see, trap, or disturb a single one. The potential of this method was staggering. If a large, unknown animal was living in Loch Ness, it would have to eat, excrete, shed skin, and reproduce. It would, by the very fact of its existence, be polluting the water with its DNA. The eDNA survey was not looking for a shadow or a shape. It was listening for a genetic whisper, a signature that had no match in the known world. The methodology itself was a masterpiece of systematic science, designed to leave no corner of the loch unexplored. The team collected over 250 water samples from 3 different depths all along the length of the loch, from the surface down to the deep, dark zones near the bottom. This ensured they would capture DNA from creatures that lived in the sunlit upper layers like fish and birds, as well as from anything that might dwell in the lightless abyss. Each sample was meticulously filtered to concentrate the genetic material, which was then frozen and shipped to laboratories in Denmark, France, and Australia for analysis. This was not a quick operation. It was a painstaking process of extraction, amplification, and sequencing that would take more than a year to complete. The team was deliberately thorough, knowing that the weight of their conclusions would rest on the robustness of their data. They were not just hunting for a monster, they were creating the first complete genetic map of Loch Ness, a baseline of its biodiversity that would be valuable for ecological study regardless of what they found or didn't find about its most famous resident. As the samples were processed and the data began to coalesce, a palpable sense of anticipation built within the scientific community and the public alike. This was being billed as the most definitive search ever undertaken. Unlike Operation Deep Scan, which could only detect large objects, the eDNA survey could identify life at the most fundamental level. It could distinguish between species, and it would be utterly unforgiving. There would be no room for misinterpretation, no debate over whether a sonar blip was a fish shoal or a log. The results would be a precise, unambiguous inventory of what was living in the loch. For believers, this was a moment of both hope and anxiety. Could this finally be the proof that would silence the skeptics, or would it erase the dream of a prehistoric survivor forever? For skeptics, it was an opportunity to apply an irrefutable scientific standard to a legend they felt was sustained by wishful thinking. Professor Jamel himself was careful to manage expectations, stating that while he hoped to find something extraordinary, he would be equally fascinated by the complete picture of the loch's ecosystem the study would reveal. The world held its breath, waiting for a genetic verdict on one of history's greatest mysteries. When the results of the eDNA survey were finally announced in September 2019, they delivered a verdict that was both definitive and, for many, deeply disappointing. Professor Neil Jamel stood before the world's media and presented a genetic portrait of Loch Ness that was breathtaking in its completeness, yet contained none of the monstrous DNA that romantics had hoped for. The study had successfully sequenced around 500 million individual genetic fragments from the water, creating an unprecedented biological inventory of the loch. The findings were stark. There was no trace of any reptilian DNA that would indicate a Jurassic survivor like a plesios, or there was no genetic signature for any large fish, such as a giant sturgeon or catfish, that could account for the sightings. Most conclusively, there was no DNA from any unknown creature, no sequence that failed to match the global database of known life. The science was unambiguous. If such animals existed in Loch Ness, they would have left a genetic calling card, and that card was nowhere to be found. What the study did find in overwhelming and undeniable abundance was the DNA of the European eel. The loch was absolutely teeming with it. Eel DNA was present in virtually every single sample, from the surface to the deepest, darkest sediments. This was the study's most powerful and significant result. It did not prove that giant eels exist, as Professor Jamel was careful to point out. The eDNA technique cannot determine the size or age of an organism. It can only confirm its presence. However, it did something far more profound. It completely eliminated the most popular exotic explanations while simultaneously elevating the most plausible native one. The giant eel theory, once considered a skeptical fallback position, was now supported by a mountain of genetic evidence. It became the only scientifically viable candidate left standing. The study suggested that the most likely source of the monster sightings is a population of known animals that, under the right conditions, can grow to a size that inspires awe and mystery. The scientific community largely received the eDNA results as the most compelling and final word on the biological reality of the monster. For biologists and geneticists, this was a clear case closed. The methodology was robust, the sampling was comprehensive, and the conclusions were inescapable. The survey had applied a forensic standard of proof to the legend and found it wanting. It demonstrated that the loch's ecosystem, while rich and complex, operates within the known boundaries of modern biology. There is no hidden population of large, unknown vertebrates. the environment simply could not support them without leaving a massive genetic footprint. For many scientists, the eDNA study represented the end of a chapter, a definitive demonstration that the tools of 21st century science could finally lay a centuries-old mystery to rest. Unsurprisingly, dedicated believers in the Loch Ness Monster were not ready to concede defeat. They quickly raised thoughtful questions about the study's limitations, arguing that while powerful, eDNA technology is not an infallible magic wand. One key criticism focused on the possibility of a false negative. Could a very small, reclusive population of large animals evade detection? If there are only one or two creatures, and they dwell primarily in the deep, anoxic sediments at the very bottom of the loch where DNA degrades more quickly, is it possible their genetic material was simply too dilute or too degraded to be captured by the sampling method? Another point raised was the nature of the creature itself. If Nessie is not a plesios or but something truly unknown, perhaps even an invertebrate or a species with a unique biology that sheds very little DNA, the standard genetic databases might not have a sequence to match it against. In that scenario, an unknown creature's DNA might have been sequenced but simply categorized as unidentified or mistaken for a known species. Furthermore, believers pointed out that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The eDNA survey provides a snapshot in time, a picture of the loch's inhabitants during the sampling period in 2018. It cannot prove that a large creature never lived in the loch, only that one was not detected during that specific window. They argue that the cumulative weight of historical evidence, the sonar contacts, the Dinsdale film, and the thousands of eyewitness accounts spanning decades cannot be simply dismissed by a single study, no matter how technologically advanced. For them, the mystery endivs not as a defiance of science but as a challenge to it. The eDNA results, rather than being the final word, represent a new piece of the puzzle, one that narrows the field of possibilities but does not entirely extinguish the flame of curiosity. The search continues, now refined by genetics, forever balancing on the delicate line between what we can prove and what we dare to believe. Of course, the surgeon's photograph is the most famous deception, but it is far from the only time tricksters have waded into the murky waters of Loch Ness, intent on muddying them further. The history of the monster is punctuated by a series of elaborate hoaxes, some born from a desire for fame, others from a simple, mischievous urge to poke fun at the media frenzy, and a few that were even intended to bolster the legend itself. Perhaps the most delightfully absurd of these early deceptions also involved the unfortunate Marmaduke Wetherell, the big game hunter whose humiliation set the stage for the surgeon's photograph. Following his very public failure to find the monster for the Daily Mail in 1933, Wetherell was determined to prove his worth. Later that same year, he announced a spectacular discovery. He had found the creature's footprints along the shore of the loch. He presented plaster casts of the prints, which were large, heavy, and deeply impressed in the soil, suggesting a creature of tremendous weight. For a brief moment, it seemed like Wetherell had redeemed himself, providing the first physical evidence of the beast. The triumph was short-lived. The plaster casts were sent to the Natural History Museum in London for analysis, where experts made a startling identification. The footprints were not from an unknown prehistoric reptile. They had been made by a dried hippopotamus foot, most likely repurposed from an umbrella stand or as a decorative novelty item popular at the time. The revelation was a public relations disaster for Wetherell and the newspapers that had touted the find. It was this very public ridicule that, according to his stepson's deathbed confession, fueled Wetherell's desire for revenge, leading directly to the surgeon's photograph hoax the following year. The hippo foot incident is a perfect example of how the desire for evidence could outpace common sense, and how a clever prankster could exploit the media's insatiable appetite for a sensational story. As technology advanced, so did the methods of the hoaxers. The 1970s, a golden age of monster hunting, also saw some of the most technically ambitious pranks. One involved the use of a miniature submarine, a far cry from Wetherell's simple model. A group of engineering students, inspired by the legend and perhaps a few pints of ale, constructed a small, submersible craft designed to look like the classic humped back of the monster. They would operate it remotely in the loch, creating a convincing wake and occasionally having it surface briefly before diving again. Their goal wasn't necessarily malice or fame. It was a sophisticated engineering challenge, a test of their skills against the backdrop of the world's greatest mystery. They succeeded in fooling several tourists and even a few earnest investigators before their ruse was uncovered, demonstrating that in the age of sonar and underwater cameras, a dedicated prankster needed to up their game. Documentary filmmakers, ironically those tasked with uncovering the truth, have also been known to contribute to the deception. In the race for ratings and a dramatic story, some productions have resorted to creating their own evidence. There are documented cases where crews have deployed inflatable monster humps, towed them across the loch, and presented the resulting footage as a recreation that was a little too convincing, blurring the lines between illustration and outright fabrication. In one notorious instance, a documentary used computer-generated imagery to create a stunningly realistic monster sequence, initially presenting it as genuine analysis of sonar data before later admitting it was a special effect. These acts reveal a different kind of hoax, one driven not by a personal grudge or a student prank, but by the commercial pressure to deliver the spectacular visuals that audiences have come to expect from the Nessie legend. What drives this enduring impulse to hoax? Beyond simple mischief, it often stems from a deep, almost paradoxical connection to the legend itself. Some pranksters are not trying to destroy the mystery, they are trying to become a part of it. They see the global fascination and want to inject themselves into the narrative, to leave their own mark on the story, even if that mark is a deliberate falsehood. For others, it's a form of critique, a way to highlight the credulity of the public and the media's willingness to believe anything that fits a compelling headline. Each successful hoax holds up a mirror to the investigators, exposing the gaps in their methods and the power of wishful thinking. Ultimately, these deceptions are an inseparable thread in the rich tapestry of the Loch Ness story. They remind us that the mystery is not just about geology and biology, but about human nature, our capacity for wonder, our susceptibility to deception, and our timeless desire to believe that the world is still a place of magic and monsters. Yet beyond the thrill of the hunt and the glow of global fame lies a more tangible and arguably more powerful legacy of the Loch Ness Monster, one that has fundamentally reshaped the landscape and livelihood of the Scottish Highlands. The legend of Nessie is not merely a subject of scientific debate or a cultural icon. It is a multi-million-dollar economic engine. To understand its true power, you need only travel to the small village of Drumnadrochit, nestled on the western shore of the loch. This quiet community has been utterly transformed into the undisputed epicenter of the Nessie phenomenon, a place where the line between local folklore and global commodity has been permanently blurred. The village, which might otherwise be a quiet stop for hikers and history enthusiasts drawn to the ruins of nearby Urquhart Castle, is now a bustling hub entirely dedicated to the monster. Its main street is a corridor of opportunity, lined with shops whose windows are filled with every conceivable iteration of the creature. Plush toys in every size, keychains, mugs emblazoned with sonar images, and t-shirts proclaiming, "I saw Nessie." Almost at the heart of this commercial ecosystem are the two rival Nessie exhibitions that stand almost directly opposite each other, a testament to the sheer volume of interest. The Loch Ness Center and Exhibition and Nessieland offer visitors immersive, curated journeys through the mystery. They are not simple souvenir stalls. They are modern, multimedia experiences that walk guests through the history of sightings, the scientific expeditions, and the various theories, blending genuine historical artifacts with engaging displays. These centers serve a crucial purpose. They validate the visitor's journey. They provide a structured narrative, a sense of having learned something, before sending them out to the gift shop to purchase a tangible piece of the mystery. The economic impact of this tourism is staggering. It is estimated that the Loch Ness Monster generates well over £40 million for the Scottish economy each year. This figure encompasses not just the direct spending at exhibitions and shops, but the vast ripple effect, the hotels and bed and breakfasts that are fully booked throughout the summer, the restaurants serving meals to hungry tourists, the boat tour operators offering trips onto the water, and the guides who lead walks along the shoreline. For many local families, Nessie is not a myth. It is the bedrock of their livelihood, a benevolent creature that puts food on the table and keeps the community thriving. This commercial success has created a fascinating and complex relationship between the local population and the legend. While some long-time residents might privately chuckle at the fervor of the believers, there is a widespread recognition that the monster is the region's most valuable asset. The phenomenon is managed with a savvy understanding of branding and marketing. Local businesses actively collaborate on initiatives like the live webcams, understanding that keeping the mystery in the global conversation is essential for continued interest. The annual Loch Ness Marathon and other events use the monster's likeness to attract participants from around the world. This pragmatic embrace of the legend highlights a key truth. The question of Nessie's biological reality has become almost secondary to its economic reality. The creature's greatest trick was not hiding from sonar beams, but becoming an indispensable part of the Highland economy. It is a powerful example of how a story, when nurtured and commodified, can generate more sustainable wealth than any traditional industry in a remote and beautiful, but often economically challenged part of the world. The monster, real or not, has proven to be the most reliable resident of the loch, one that consistently delivers prosperity season after season. But if we truly want to understand the emotional core of this legend, we must set aside the sonar graphs and the newspaper headlines for a moment and listen to the voices of those who were there. The most enduring evidence for the Loch Ness Monster has never been a photograph or a scientific reading. It is the sheer volume of sincere, detailed, and often deeply moving accounts from people who believe with every fiber of their being that they witnessed something extraordinary. These are not stories from excitable tourists alone. They come from individuals whose professions demand a cool head and a reliable pair of eyes. Consider the account of Police Constable James MacLeod and his wife from the spring of 1934. While driving along the loch near Invermariston, they saw a creature they estimated to be between 25 and 30 feet long, with a neck like a serpent, swimming against the wind and creating a substantial wake. For a police officer to file such a report was a serious matter, lending an air of official credibility that a casual sighting could never achieve. The diversity of these witnesses is one of the most compelling aspects of the phenomenon. A year after Constable MacLeod's sighting, a London banker named Sir Edward Mountain, skeptical of the growing legend, decided to take a scientific approach. He hired a team of 20 men, many of them experienced gamekeepers and fishermen with a keen understanding of the natural world, and stationed them around the loch with powerful telescopes and cameras. These were hardened outdoorsmen, not prone to fantasy. Over the course of several weeks in the summer of 1934, this team reported no fewer than 21 separate sightings, describing a dark grey creature with a long neck and 2 humps. One of the watchers, a man named John MacLeod, even managed to capture a brief, blurry film of a large, dark object moving through the water. The fact that this many trained observers, employed specifically to debunk the myth, ended up corroborating it, added a layer of validation that was difficult to ignore. The stories span decades, creating a tapestry of encounters that refuses to fade with time. In the summer of 1960, just months after Tim Dinsdale filmed his famous hump, a group of 35 tourists on a coach witnessed a dramatic scene near the ruins of Urquhart Castle. They collectively watched as a long, dark creature with a slender neck swam parallel to the shore for several minutes before diving beneath the surface. The power of a mass sighting like this lies in its collective nature. It is far harder to dismiss 35 people as simultaneously deluded or mistaken than it is a single individual. Then, in July of 1965, a patrician figure named Commander R.T. Good, a retired British naval officer and a respected author on maritime mysteries, lent his considerable credibility to the legend. After a thorough investigation of the earliest accounts, Good published his book, firmly concluding that a large, unknown animal inhabited the loch. His endorsement, coming from a man accustomed to rigorous analysis and the scrutiny of evidence, was a significant moment for the legitimacy of the search. Perhaps the most poignant accounts come from those who encountered the mystery not as a spectacle, but as a part of their daily lives. Local fishermen whose families have worked the loch for generations have their own stories. They speak of times when their nets were mysteriously torn by something massive moving in the depths, or of strange disturbances on otherwise calm days. These are practical men whose lives are intimately tied to the water, and their quiet, often reluctant testimony carries a weight all its own. The descriptions they provide are as varied as the witnesses themselves. Some see a creature with a series of humps like the coils of a giant sea serpent. Others describe the classic long neck and small head, reminiscent of a plesiosaur. Some reports mention a dark, eel-like body slithering just below the surface, while a few even speak of seeing flippers or paddles. This inconsistency is often used by skeptics to question the validity of the sightings, but for believers, it suggests something else entirely, that we are not looking at a single, monolithic creature, but perhaps a family or even a species with varied individuals, or that the same animal can appear dramatically different depending on the angle, the light, and the water conditions. What binds all these disparate accounts together is the palpable sincerity of the people behind them. These are not individuals seeking fame or fortune. Many, in fact, were initially reluctant to come forward, fearing ridicule. You can hear it in their voices, see it in their faces in old interviews, a mixture of awe, confusion, and an unwavering conviction that what they saw was real. A bank manager, a priest, a surgeon, a lighthouse keeper, their lives and backgrounds could not be more different, yet they are united by a shared, inexplicable experience on the shores of the same dark lake. This is the human fuel that has kept the mystery burning for nearly a century. It is the reason why, even in the face of scientific skepticism and exposed hoaxes, the legend of the Loch Ness Monster endures. It is built not on a single piece of dubious evidence, but on a mountain of heartfelt testimony from ordinary people who had the extraordinary happen to them, leaving them with a story that would define their lives and forever link them to one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. Among the many fantastic explanations for what the Loch Ness Monster could be, one idea has captured the public imagination more than any other, becoming almost synonymous with the creature itself: the theory that Nessie is a surviving plesiosaur. This captivating notion conjures images of a living relic from the age of dinosaurs, a majestic marine reptile that somehow escaped extinction and found a secluded sanctuary in the Scottish Highlands. To understand the enduring power of this theory, we first need to picture the animal in question. Plesiosaurs were not dinosaurs, but a distinct group of marine reptiles that ruled the ancient seas for millions of years. They are instantly recognizable by their bizarre body plan, often described as resembling a snake threaded through the body of a turtle. They had 4 large, powerful flippers shaped like paddles, a stout, barrel-like body, and perhaps most iconically, an incredibly long and flexible neck, which they likely used to swiftly dart their heads through the water to snatch fish and other prey. Fossil evidence shows a wide variety of species, some with relatively short necks and others, like the famous Elasmosaurus, with necks containing over 70 vertebrae, stretching to truly astonishing length. This classic silhouette, a small head perched on a serpentine neck, followed by humped body, aligns perfectly with countless descriptions of the Loch Ness creature, providing a ready-made and scientifically grounded identity for the mysterious entity in the water. On the surface, the plesiosaur or theory presents a surprisingly plausible scenario. Loch Ness is, after all, a place of immense scale and profound isolation. Carved by glaciers during the last ice age, it is a deep, cold, and murky trench that feels like a world apart from the modern era. Its immense depth, plunging to over 700 feet, and its vast volume of fresh water create an environment that seems capable of hiding almost anything. The idea of a small population of these ancient reptiles surviving undetected in such a secluded abyss taps directly into our fascination with living fossils. Creatures like the coelacanth, a fish thought extinct for 66 million years until it was miraculously discovered alive in the deep waters off South Africa in 1938. The coelacanth's discovery proved that the deep oceans could still hold spectacular secrets, and if such a survivor could exist in the remote Indian Ocean, why not in the dark, unexplored depths of Loch Ness? This powerful analogy gave the plesiosaur or theory a tremendous boost, suggesting that the loch could be a similar ecological time capsule, a protected refuge where a lineage from the Jurassic period could have persisted, unseen by humanity for millennia. However, when we move from this romantic premise to the hard, unforgiving light of modern biological and geological science, the theory begins to unravel at an alarming rate. The first and most formidable obstacle is the concept of a viable population. A single Nessie cannot exist. For a species to survive for thousands of years, it requires a breeding population. Scientists estimate that to maintain genetic diversity and avoid inbreeding, a population of large vertebrates would need at least several hundred, and more likely several thousand, individuals. The notion of hundreds of plesiosaurs, each potentially reaching lengths of 30 to 40 feet, living in Loch Ness without leaving behind an overwhelming amount of evidence is simply untenable. We are not talking about a few shy eels, we are talking about an ecosystem dominated by massive air-breathing predators. The sheer biomass required to support such a population would be staggering. These animals would need to eat tons of fish every single day, which would have a catastrophic and obvious impact on the loch's fish stocks, depleting them to a point where commercial fishing and the entire food web would collapse. The loch, for all its vastness, is an enclosed freshwater system with limited nutrients. It is an ecological desert compared to the rich, open oceans where plesiosaurs originally thrived. It could not possibly support the caloric demands of even a modest number of such large carnivores. This leads to the second and perhaps most damning scientific flaw, the creature's biology. Plesiosaurs were marine reptiles. They evolved to live in saltwater environments. Their physiology, including how they processed water and electrolytes, was adapted for the ocean. Loch Ness is a freshwater lake, and the transition from a saltwater to a freshwater habitat is a monumental physiological challenge that very few marine species have ever accomplished. It would require fundamental changes in kidney function and salt regulation that are unlikely to have occurred in a relict population. Furthermore, as air-breathing animals, plesiosaurs would need to surface frequently to breathe. This single behavioral trait dismantles the entire premise of a secretive, rarely seen animal. If a breeding population of large, air-breathing reptiles lived in the loch, they would be seen not just once in a while but constantly. Their need to breathe would force them to the surface dozens of times a day, creating a near-permanent spectacle of surfacing heads, blowing breaths, and diving humps that would be impossible for the thousands of annual visitors and residents to miss. The loch is only 23 miles long. It is not an endless sea where a creature can easily hide. The sporadic nature of sightings, which believers often cite as proof of the creature's elusiveness, is actually the strongest argument against it being an air-breathing animal like a plesiosaur. Finally, we must confront the fossil record and the history of the loch itself. There is no fossil evidence of plesiosaurs or any large prehistoric reptiles ever having lived in freshwater lakes like Loch Ness. Their fossils are exclusively found in marine sedimentary rocks, indicating they were creatures of the open ocean. More critically, the very landscape of Scotland presents an insurmountable geographical problem. Loch Ness, as we know it today, is a very young feature in geological terms. It was carved by glaciers a mere 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. Before that, the entire region was buried under thousands of feet of ice for tens of thousands of years, rendering it completely uninhabitable. This means that for plesiosaurs to be in the loch now, they would have had to colonize it within the last 10,000 years. But plesiosaurs went extinct along with the other non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago. There is a gap of over 65 million years between their extinction and the formation of Loch Ness. For the theory to hold, one must believe that a population of plesiosaurs survived the cataclysmic asteroid impact that wiped out their kin, somehow persisted in the oceans for 65 million years without leaving a single fossil trace, and then, in this incredibly narrow window of time, found their way into a newly formed Scottish lake, adapting to freshwater in the process. This sequence of events strains credibility far beyond the breaking point, transforming a charming idea into a biological impossibility. The plesiosaur theory, while a beautiful and evocative narrative, ultimately serves as a powerful example of how a compelling story can capture our hearts, even when the evidence of science firmly and decisively points in a different direction. While the legend of Nessie was being built on eyewitness accounts and tantalizing sonar contacts, a different kind of investigation was taking shape, one driven not by a desire to prove the monster's existence, but by a disciplined commitment to scientific skepticism. This movement found its most organized voice in groups like the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, known as CSICUP, founded in 1976. Comprised of renowned scientists, magicians, and academics, including the influential astronomer and author Carl Sagan, CSICUP's mission was to apply rigorous critical thinking to extraordinary claims, from UFOs to psychic phenomena. Their approach to the Loch Ness Monster was not one of dismissive ridicule, but of meticulous point-by-point analysis. They understood that for a claim to be accepted as scientific, it must withstand the most stringent scrutiny, and they took it upon themselves to provide that scrutiny where they felt the popular media had failed. These skeptics approached the loch not with cameras and sonar, but with Occam's razor. The principle that the simplest explanation, the one requiring the fewest assumptions, is most often the correct one. Their work often involved re-examining the very evidence that believers held up as proof, and they consistently found alternative, more prosaic interpretations. Take, for instance, the famous photographs, where believers saw the flipper of a plesiosaur, or in Robert Rhines's underwater images, skeptics like Dr. Ronald Binns, a former member of the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau who later became a prominent critic, pointed to the well-documented phenomenon of decaying wood. A waterlogged log undergoing decomposition at the bottom of the loch can split and warp in ways that create astonishingly creature-like shapes. The rough texture, interpreted as reptilian skin, is entirely consistent with the effects of water erosion on timber. Similarly, the long, serpentine shapes captured in other photos were often revealed to be nothing more than boat wakes viewed from an unusual angle, or even lines of otters swimming in a row, their humped backs creating a deceptive silhouette. The skeptics argued that our brains are wired to seek out patterns, especially familiar ones like animal shapes, in random visual noise, a cognitive bias known as pareidolia. At Loch Ness, where the water is dark and the mind is primed by legend, this tendency goes into overdrive, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. The analysis of sonar data received the same careful treatment. While contacts like those from Operation Deep Scan were exciting, skeptics highlighted the many natural phenomena that can create false echoes. The Loch's deep waters are stratified with layers of different temperatures known as thermoclines. These layers can act as reflective surfaces for sonar beams, creating large, solid-looking returns that move and shift with the currents, mimicking a large animate object. Furthermore, the Loch's bottom is not a smooth, featureless plain. It is littered with geological formations and sunken debris that can produce strong, unexpected sonar signatures. From the skeptical perspective, each piece of evidence crumbled under examination, revealing a catalogue of misidentified mundane objects. A bird becoming a head and neck, a deer swim becoming a monster, a wave becoming a hump, a log becoming a body. They argued that the mystery was not a puzzle to be solved, but an illusion to be understood, built on a foundation of understandable human error. Perhaps the most compelling argument from the skeptical camp revolves around the sheer biological impossibility of sustaining a population of large creatures in the Loch. This is not a minor point about blurry photos. It is a fundamental challenge based on the principles of ecology. A single creature, they argue, is not enough. For a species to survive for centuries, it requires a breeding population, likely numbering in the dozens or even hundreds to maintain genetic diversity. The amount of food required to sustain such a population would be enormous, far exceeding the available biomass of fish in Loch Ness, which is a relatively nutrient-poor environment. The Loch's salmon and trout populations are well studied and could not support such a predatory burden without showing obvious signs of depletion. Furthermore, as air-breathing animals, these creatures would need to surface constantly, making them a near-permanent feature of the landscape rather than a rare and elusive spectacle. For these scientists, the case is not merely unproven, it is closed. The absence of a carcass, the lack of any definitive physical evidence despite decades of searching, and the overwhelming weight of alternative explanations lead them to a single, inescapable conclusion. The Loch Ness Monster is a beautiful myth, a testament to the power of human imagination and our enduring love for a good mystery, but it is not a biological reality. And so our journey across the dark waters of Loch Ness draws to a close, a voyage that has spanned not just miles but centuries. We have stood with Saint Columba on the banks of the River Ness, felt the thrill of the 1930s media explosion, and scrutinized the most famous photograph ever taken, only to watch it dissolve into a confession of revenge. We have followed the dedicated volunteers of the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau in their patient vigil, marveled at the tantalizing sonar contacts and underwater photographs, and witnessed the grand technological ambition of Operation Deep Scan. We have listened to the sincere accounts of policemen and bankers, engineers and fishermen, all united by a single, unforgettable experience. And we have weighed the compelling evidence of modern science, from the giant eel theory to the definitive genetic map painted by the Edenay survey, which found no monsters, only the profound and beautiful complexity of a natural ecosystem. The great debate, then, seems to have reached a scientific consensus. The preponderance of evidence, scrutinized through the rigorous lens of biology, geology, and physics, points overwhelmingly toward a world of natural wonders rather than supernatural ones. The monster, as a large, unknown prehistoric reptile, appears to be a magnificent illusion, a tapestry woven from misidentified waves, floating logs, optical mirages, and the occasional, genuinely giant fish. Yet here is the most fascinating paradox of all. The legend does not die, it thrives. It endures with a vitality that defies every skeptical argument and every negative scientific finding. This is because the truth of Loch Ness was never solely a question of biology. It is, and always has been, a question of psychology, of story, of the human spirit itself. The enduring power of Nessie lies in what the creature represents. In a world that has been mapped, measured, and explained to an unprecedented degree, the idea that there might still be a hidden valley, a lost world, or a dark loch guarding a primordial secret is profoundly alluring. The monster is a symbol of the last great unknown, a reminder that wonder and mystery are not yet extinct. It speaks to a fundamental human need, the desire for a world that is still capable of surprising us, of presenting a puzzle that cannot be easily solved by technology or logic. This is why we pass the story down to our children, why we still gaze out at the water hoping for a glimpse. We are not just looking for an animal, we are searching for magic. The true monster, then, is not a physical being lurking in the depths. It is the story itself, a living, breathing entity that has been shaped and nurtured by every witness, every investigator, every skeptic, and every dreamer who has ever encountered the loch. It is a collaborative work of imagination, a shared narrative that connects us across generations. The real magic of Loch Ness is not conditional on the existence of a plesiosaur. The magic is in the act of looking. It is in the chill that runs down your spine when the fog rolls in the shared anticipation on a boat tour when the sonar pings, in the quiet hope that just maybe, this time, the water will reveal its secret. That feeling, that sense of possibility, is the true legacy of the loch, and it is a gift that science can never take away. So as the mist once again settles over the silent, peat-stained waters, we are left not with an answer but with a choice. You can choose to see Loch Ness as a mystery solved, a case closed by the relentless march of science. Or you can choose to see it as it has been for centuries, a place of endless potential, a landscape where the line between reality and legend beautifully blurs. The loch does not need a monster to be special. Its power lies in its endless capacity to make us wonder. We will leave you with that thought, and with this final, timeless image of the water, as dark and deep and full of secrets as it has always been. The story of Nessie is now yours. What do you believe lies beneath the surface? Share your own theories and reflections in the comments below. The investigation, it seems, is never truly